Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Justice delivered in haste is often justice denied in secret. Tonight we unseal Obsidian Archive File 734B. The Arthur Finch disappearance, a case declared solved in under 72 hours, and then buried for 50 years. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some files are closed not because the truth is found, but because it needs to be buried. His name was Arthur Finch, or so the records say. In the quiet, unassuming town of Oakhaven, a place where lives unfold with predictable rhythm, Arthur Finch was the metronome of mediocrity. A librarian at the municipal archive, he was a man of routines. He left his small, tidy apartment at precisely 7:45 a.m., returned at 5:15 p.m., and was known to his neighbors only by a polite, distant nod. He was background noise, a human element so seamlessly integrated into the scenery that to notice him was to notice the cracks in the pavement or the slow fade of street signs. He was, by all accounts, a man who was never truly there, even when he stood right in front of you. This carefully constructed invisibility is what makes the events of October 12th so profoundly disturbing. When he failed to show up for work for 2 consecutive days, a wellness check was performed. Police found him in his armchair, a book resting in his lap, a cold cup of tea on the end table. The scene was one of serene, if lonely, finality. The coroner's initial assessment, delivered with unnatural speed, cited acute cardiac failure. A man with no known medical history, a man who walked 3 miles every day, had simply stopped. The case was closed before the ink on the preliminary report was dry. A man lives, a man dies. The paperwork is filed. But when you look closer into the dark corners of the official narrative, the facade begins to crumble. The book in his lap was a dense text on pre-Soviet cryptography, upside down. The tea was chamomile, but Finch was known to drink only black coffee. A single, unidentified fingerprint was found on the rim of the teacup. A print that belonged neither to Finch nor to any first responder. It was never identified. More unsettling was the state of his apartment. It was clean, yes, but it was sterile. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, no letters or postcards. His closet contained 3 identical gray suits, 5 identical white shirts. His bookshelf held classics, but they looked unread, their spines uncreased, more props than possessions. An investigator, a rookie named Miller with an eye for detail, noted in his personal log, "It's not a home, it's a stage." Who was Arthur Finch? A deeper dive into his records only deepened the mystery. His birth certificate was issued decades after his supposed birth date. His social security number had no history prior to his arrival in Oakhaven 10 years earlier. He had no school records, no military service, no digital footprint beyond his library membership. He was a ghost, a legend created on paper, living a life that was a perfect, impenetrable lie. The authorities accepted the official story without question. A lonely librarian died of a heart attack. Case closed. But how could a case be closed when they never even knew the man's real name? The speed with which they accepted this fiction suggests they weren't just uninterested in the truth. They were actively avoiding it. Arthur Finch wasn't a man who died. He was a story that ended. And someone wanted that book shut fast. The path to a buried truth is often paved with procedural expediency. In the case of Arthur Finch, the timeline wasn't just fast. It was a declaration. It was a message. From the moment the door to apartment 3B was breached, a clock began to tick. Not towards justice, but towards containment. Let's deconstruct those critical 72 hours. Hour 1. The call comes in. 2 patrol officers and a paramedic crew are on scene. The apartment is declared secure. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. Hour 4. Detective Miller arrives. He's young, eager, and immediately troubled by the sterility of the scene. He bags the teacup with the anomalous fingerprint and notes the pristine condition of the cryptography book. Hour 7. The coroner provides a verbal cause of death over the phone. Cardiac arrest. It's unusually quick. No toxicology screen is ordered. No full autopsy is deemed necessary. The body is removed. Hour 12. Miller begins canvassing neighbors. The responses are a haunting echo of one another. Quiet man. Kept to himself. Never had any visitors. The uniformity is chilling. It's as if they're reading from a script they didn't even know they'd been handed. Hour 24. The official report is filed. It's a sparse document, barely 2 pages long. It lists the cause of death as natural and recommends the case be closed. Miller protests to his superior, Captain Davies. He brings up the fingerprint, the staged scene, Finch's non-existent background. Davies is dismissive. Miller, the man was a loner. His heart gave out. We have 3 active homicides and a robbery crew hitting the north side. We don't have the resources to chase ghosts over a natural death. Drop it. The phrase chase ghosts hangs in the air, more literal than Davies likely intended. Hour 36. Miller disobeys. He runs the fingerprint through federal databases himself, using a colleague's login. The search comes back with a classified do not proceed flag. His access is immediately revoked. An hour later, Davies calls him into his office. The door's closed. The conversation is not a recommendation. It's an order. The case is closed. Miller's memo detailing the fingerprint flag is removed from the file and shredded in front of him. Hour 48. The press release is issued. It's a single sentence buried in the local police blotter, a footnote in the daily life of the city. Local resident found deceased, no foul play suspected. The narrative is set in stone. Hour 72. The physical file, now stripped of any inconvenient questions, is signed by Captain Davies. It's stamped in thick red ink, case closed. It is then couriered by a special officer, not to the precinct's records room, but to a regional federal building. As the file is handed over, Miller, watching from his car across the street, understands. This was never a local police matter. Oak Haven PD was just the cleanup crew. The speed wasn't about efficiency. It was about jurisdiction. They were ordered to solve it, to close it, before someone with real authority had a chance to ask the questions they were so determined to ignore. Every cover-up has loose threads, details too inconvenient to erase, left dangling in the hope they will go unnoticed. For the case of Arthur Finch, that thread was a 1998 sedan, found abandoned on a desolate stretch of Route 41, 10 days before his death. This wasn't just a clue, it was the entire story, hidden in plain sight and deliberately ignored. The incident is recorded in a tow and recovery report, a document that should have been the cornerstone of the investigation. On the evening of October 2nd, a state trooper on patrol noticed the car parked precariously on the shoulder of a wooded road, 20 miles from Oak Haven and miles from the nearest town. The doors were unlocked, the keys were in the ignition, and there was no sign of the driver. Per protocol, the car was towed to a county impound lot. The next morning, Arthur Finch appeared to claim it. He was calm, almost detached, explaining he had simply run out of gas while going for a drive and had walked to a payphone to call a friend. He paid the fine in cash and drove away. The report ends there, but the truth, as always, is in the margins. We located the tow truck driver, a man named Gus, now retired. He remembers the car vividly. "Strangest damn thing," he told us, his voice raspy over the phone. "The location, for one. Nobody goes down that road unless they're lost or they're dumping something. And the car? It was clean. Too clean for a breakdown." But Gus remembered something else, something not in the report. As he was hooking the sedan up, a black car, a government-style Crown Victoria, with no plates, drove past slowly from the direction the sedan was facing. It didn't stop. It just observed. The most damning piece of information, however, comes from a leaked internal impound lot inspection sheet. Before a vehicle is released, a basic inventory is done. The mechanic who performed the check on Finch's car noted that the gas tank was, in fact, over half full. He also found something else. Tucked deep under the driver's side dashboard, wired directly to the car's battery, was a small, sophisticated listening device. A bug. This detail was on the mechanic's internal worksheet, but was conspicuously absent from the official report given to Finch and filed with the police. Someone made sure that discovery was buried. This single event recontextualizes everything. Finch wasn't a man who ran out of gas. He was a man who was being tracked. The abandoned car wasn't a simple breakdown. Was it a failed abduction? A dead drop? A warning? Was Finch aware of the bug? Did he abandon the car to signal to someone that he was compromised? These questions were never asked because the report was buried in a different jurisdiction, and the Oakhaven PD, in their rush to close the case, never requested the ancillary files. They saw a man who died in his chair, not a man whose car was found bugged on a spy thriller back road just days earlier. It was a willful act of looking away. The car by the wayside wasn't a loose thread, it was an anchor, and pulling on it would have dragged the entire, carefully constructed official narrative down into the depths. Truth, like a body, can be buried, but it rarely stays put. 15 years after the file on Arthur Finch was sealed, it was forced open again. The catalyst was retired Detective Miller. Haunted by the case that defined and derailed his career, he leaked the one piece of evidence he had managed to save: a photograph of the classified report on the unidentified fingerprint from the teacup. He sent it to a small, independent journalism outlet known for its tenacity. The publication of the story, headlined "The Librarian Who Never Was," caused a minor but persistent political tremor, eventually triggering a formal, if reluctant, official inquiry. What followed was not an investigation, but a masterclass in institutional damage control. The inquiry's final report, a heavily redacted 200-page document, was declassified 3 years later. It is a monument to obfuscation. On-screen text from the report appears, with thick black bars covering most of the words. We can read fragments. Acknowledge procedural irregularities, and the initial investigation conducted by Oakhaven PD was insufficient. It's a carefully worded slap on the wrist. The report concedes that Arthur Finch was not the man's real name. His identity, it states, was a construct. His true name is redacted. His purpose in Oakhaven is redacted. The agency he worked for is referred to only as a Sub-Directorate of National Security. Piecing together the unredacted fragments, a ghostly image emerges. Finch was likely a cryptographer or analyst, placed in the quiet town in a protected status after a project he was on, codenamed Whispering Cinder, was compromised. The inquiry confirms the existence of the listening device in his car, but concludes it cannot be definitively linked to the circumstances of his death. It dismisses the anomalous fingerprint as a lab processing error. In its final, chilling conclusion, the report upholds the original finding. The subject, whose real name remains classified, died of natural causes. The case remains closed. It is a perfect, circular piece of bureaucratic theater. It admits to a cover-up, while simultaneously reinforcing it. It acknowledges the lies, but redacts the truth. The document is an admission of guilt disguised as a vindication of the state. It tells us that a secret agent lived and died in Oakhaven, but that we, the public, have no right to know who he was, what he was doing, or who might have wanted him dead. The case was solved too quickly because it was never a case to be solved. It was an operation to be concluded. We are left where we began, with a ghost in an armchair. Was he eliminated by his own agency for knowing too much? Was his death faked? A final disappearing act into a new, deeper identity? The official inquiry provides no answers. It simply replaces the question marks with black bars, a permanent redaction of a man's life and death. The file is closed, but the silence it leaves behind is deafening. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some truths are not buried, they are simply ignored. Narrator, Harmony Creek. The name itself was a promise, a carefully constructed facade of peace and community. But after the murder of Eleanor Vance and the lightning-fast arrest of local outcast Arthur Finch, that facade began to crack. Justice, the town was told, had been served. The case was closed. But in the quiet corners of this town, in the worn booths of the Main Street diner, over backyard fences, in hushed phone calls after midnight, a different story was being told. A story of doubt. Narrator. The official narrative, published in the Harmony Creek Chronicle, was a simple, digestible story. A loner, a drifter with a history of minor offenses, had a confrontation with a beloved town figure. It escalated. A tragedy occurred. The evidence, they said, was overwhelming. The confession, irrefutable. But the people who had lived in Harmony Creek their whole lives knew things the official reports left out. They knew Arthur Finch, while quiet and strange, was harmless. He fixed broken things for people, asked for little in return, and was terrified of confrontation. The man described in the papers was a stranger to them. Narrator. We uncovered an interview with Martha Gable, Eleanor's next-door neighbor, conducted by a state investigator a year after the conviction. It was never entered into the official case file. In it, she speaks of a dark-colored sedan she saw speeding away from Eleanor's house minutes before the body was discovered. Not Arthur's beat-up pickup truck. I told the sheriff, she said, her voice trembling on the tape. I told him exactly what I saw. He just nodded, wrote something down in his little book, and told me they had their man. He said I must be mistaken about the time. Narrator. Her account was not an isolated incident. We found others. A fisherman who heard shouting from the direction of the woods, but the voice wasn't Arthur's deep, slow drawl. A grocery clerk who swore one of the town's most influential figures came in late that night, clothes disheveled, buying bandages and hydrogen peroxide with cash, his hands shaking. When these stories were brought to law enforcement, they were dismissed as rumor, as grief-fueled fantasy, as the unhelpful chatter of a community struggling to cope. The case was closed. The books were balanced. Any information that complicated the simple, clean narrative was not just ignored. It was actively suppressed. The town was encouraged to move on, to heal. But healing cannot begin when the wound has been stitched shut, with a lie still festering inside. The whispers in Harmony Creek were not just gossip. They were the first signs of a profound and deliberate injustice. Narrator. In any legitimate investigation, evidence is a trail of breadcrumbs that leads detectives to a conclusion. But in the case of Eleanor Vance, it appears the conclusion came first, and the evidence was gathered to support it. Let's open the archives and examine the state's so-called mountain of evidence against Arthur Finch. What we find is not a mountain, but a molehill, carefully manicured to look imposing from a distance. Narrator. Exhibit A, the murder weapon. A claw hammer found in a ditch a mile from Arthur Finch's trailer. The prosecution claimed it was his, citing a faint, partial fingerprint. However, our forensic review, based on the case files, reveals a critical omission. The print was so degraded it could not be conclusively matched to Finch, or anyone else for that matter. It was, in the expert's own words, of limited value. Furthermore, there were no traces of the victim's blood or DNA on the hammer. None. The prosecution argued it had been wiped clean, yet the partial print remained. This is a glaring contradiction. How do you meticulously wipe a weapon clean of all biological evidence, yet leave a perfect, albeit partial, fingerprint intact? Narrator. Exhibit B, the muddy boot print. Found near the victim's back door, it was said to match the brand of work boots Finch owned. But the tread pattern was one of the most common designs in the country, sold at every hardware and department store. Thousands of people in and around Harmony Creek owned identical boots. The police never seized the boots Finch was wearing that day for a direct comparison. Instead, they took a different, older pair from his closet. Why? The report simply states the original boots could not be located. This is not evidence. It's a carefully worded insinuation. Narrator. And then there's the testimony of the sole eyewitness, a man who claimed to see Arthur Finch arguing with Eleanor Vance earlier that day. This witness had a known history of public intoxication and had recently been threatened with eviction by a company owned by one of the town's most powerful families. The same family the grocery clerk saw buying bandages that night. His testimony was inconsistent across 3 separate interviews, with the time and nature of the argument changing each time. Yet, in court, the prosecutor presented only the final, most damning version of his story. The defense never challenged the inconsistencies. The jury never heard them. The evidence wasn't weighed. It was curated. Each piece was presented in a vacuum, isolated from the context that would have revealed its weakness. A smudged print, a common boot, a compromised witness. Separately, they are nothing. But woven together by a compelling narrative from the prosecution, they became the threads of a noose, tightening around a man who was simply the most convenient suspect. Narrator. For any prosecutor seeking a swift conviction, there is no greater prize than a signed confession. It is the keystone that holds the entire structure of the case together. It erases doubt, simplifies the narrative, and all but guarantees a guilty verdict. The state claimed Arthur Finch gave a full, detailed confession after 14 hours of interrogation. But the archives tell a different story. A story not of guilt, but of psychological erosion. Narrator: Arthur Finch was brought in for questioning at 10 p.m. He was not a suspect, they said, just a person of interest. He waived his right to an attorney, a decision he was likely coerced into making. Just a few questions, Arthur, and you can go home, the transcript reads. But he didn't go home. For the next 14 hours, Detectives Miller and Shaw employed the Reed technique, a method of interrogation known for its effectiveness in eliciting confessions, both true and false. It involves isolating the subject, confronting them with supposed evidence, real or fabricated, and repeatedly shutting down any denials of guilt. It's a psychological siege. Narrator: We analyzed the language of the final signed confession. It is riddled with anomalies. The vocabulary, the sentence structure, it doesn't match known samples of Arthur's speech or writing. He was a man of few words, with a simple, direct way of speaking. The confession, however, is filled with legalistic phrases and narrative details that mirror the police's theory of the crime. Details Arthur could not have known unless they were fed to him. For example, it mentions the specific type of knot used to tamper with the back gate, a detail that had not been released to the public. He was asked to speculate on how the crime might have happened, and his exhausted hypothetical answers were later presented as factual admissions of guilt. Narrator: Dr. Eleanor Klein, a forensic psychologist who specializes in false confessions, reviewed the case file for our investigation. Everything about this scenario raises red flags, she states. The duration of the interrogation, the lack of legal counsel, the suspect's known social vulnerabilities, and the contamination of the final statement with non-public facts. This isn't a confession. It's a contaminated script. They broke him down until he was willing to sign anything just to make it stop. The confession wasn't a breakthrough in the case. It was the final manufactured piece of a puzzle that had been designed from the start. A signature on a piece of paper, obtained under extreme duress, was enough to close the file, to satisfy the public's demand for answers, and to send an innocent man to prison. The truth of what happened in that room was buried under the weight of a single, desperate signature. Narrator: A trial is meant to be a crucible, a forum where evidence is tested by fire, where testimony is scrutinized, and where the truth, ideally, is revealed. The trial of Arthur Finch was not a crucible. It was a formality, a piece of theater performed for an audience that had already been told the ending. The entire process, from jury selection to sentencing, took less than 3 days. In the annals of capital murder cases, this is an almost unheard of speed. Narrator: The prosecution, led by a district attorney with political ambitions, presented their case with chilling efficiency. They paraded their curated evidence: the inconclusive fingerprint on the hammer, the common boot print, the testimony from their compromised witness, and then their crown jewel, the confession. They read Arthur's signed statement aloud, the words echoing in the hushed courtroom. It was powerful, damning, and to the jury, who knew nothing of the 14 hours of psychological torment that produced it, it was irrefutable proof of guilt. Narrator: The defense was a specter in the courtroom. Arthur was represented by a court-appointed public defender who was overworked, under-resourced, and given less than a month to prepare for a murder trial. He called no witnesses. He presented no alternative theories. His cross-examinations were brief and listless. He failed to challenge the inconsistencies in the eyewitness testimony. He failed to question the forensic integrity of the partial fingerprint. Most critically, he never filed a motion to suppress the confession, which would have forced the court to examine the coercive nature of the interrogation. It was a catastrophic failure of the one system designed to protect the accused. It was less a defense and more a managed surrender. Narrator. The verdict came back in under an hour. Guilty on all counts, as the judge sentenced Arthur Finch to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The camera flashes of the local press filled the room. The headline in the next day's Harmony Creek Chronicle read, "Justice for Eleanor." The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monster was caged, the case was closed, but for those who knew the truth, for the neighbor who saw the wrong car, for the clerk who saw the wrong man, for the few who understood the fragility of the evidence and the cruelty of the interrogation, it was not closure. It was the sealing of a tomb. The gavel didn't just fall on Arthur Finch that day. It fell on the truth, silencing it with the full, formidable weight of the law. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some stories don't end, they just go silent. Narrator. For 50 years, the town of Havenwood slept under the heavy blanket of a solved case. The conviction of Arthur Finch for the murder of Eleanor Vance was a swift, clean cut that severed the limb of fear from the community. It was 1973. The trial lasted less than a week. The evidence, the prosecution said, was overwhelming. A witness saw him near the scene. A personal item was found in his car. His motive was painted as a crime of passion, a spurned advance that turned violent. The local paper, the Havenwood Chronicle, called it "Justice Delivered." The police chief was hailed as a hero. The district attorney secured his re-election, and Arthur Finch was sent away to prison, where he would die of a heart attack 8 years later, a convicted killer who never once wavered in his claim of innocence. But closure, true closure, is not the same as a closed case file. On the surface, Havenwood healed. Children went back to playing in the streets, doors were left unlocked again, and the name Eleanor Vance became a sad memory, a ghost story whispered by teenagers. The name Arthur Finch became a curse, a local boogeyman. The story was finished, the book was closed, but if you listened closely in the quiet moments, you could hear the pages rustling. You could feel the unease that settled in the town's foundations. Friendships between families, once unbreakable, had fractured along lines of belief and doubt. Neighbors who once shared Sunday dinners now exchanged curt nods across driveways. The case was never spoken of in public, not because it was forgotten, but because the memory was a wound that refused to scar over. It was an enforced silence, a collective agreement to not pull at the thread that might unravel everything. The detective who led the investigation, Frank Miller, retired a year after the trial, a celebrated public servant. He moved to a warmer climate and never returned to Havenwood. The prosecutor, Robert Davies, built a long and successful political career on the foundation of that one high-profile conviction. The Vance family, Eleanor's parents and siblings, left town within 2 years, unable to live with the constant reminders. And the Finch family? They were pariahs. His wife and son changed their name and vanished, swallowed by the shame of a verdict that was never truly theirs. The silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. It was the weight of a story that felt too simple, a solution that arrived too quickly. For a crime that had torn the community apart, the resolution was suspiciously neat. It was a perfectly wrapped gift that no one dared to open, for fear of what they might find inside. For 50 years, the official narrative held firm, etched in court records and newspaper archives. A solid, unshakable truth. But in the dark, dusty corners of the county records office, that truth was waiting. It was waiting for someone to notice that the foundation of it all was built on sand. The silence was about to be broken by the quietest of sounds. The turning of a page. Narrator. The silence wasn't broken by a detective or a journalist, but by a man whose job was to preserve the past, not question it. Elias Thorne was a contract archivist for Havenwood County, a meticulous, quiet man in his late 20s. His world was one of paper dust and the slow, methodical process of digitization. His task was simple: scan and index half a century of county records before they succumbed to decay. It was a monotonous job, a conversation with ghosts through fading ink and brittle paper. He scanned birth certificates, property deeds, and then he came to the criminal case files from the early 70s, box after box of forgotten tragedies and petty crimes. Then he pulled one labeled, Finch, Arthur, Homicide, 1973, closed. To Elias, it was just another file. He opened the box, the scent of old paper and stale air hitting him. He began the process, page by page. The initial police report, witness statements, crime scene photographs, stark and monochrome, the coroner's findings. It was all there, a neat and tidy narrative leading to a swift conviction. But Elias had a peculiar mind, one that saw patterns where others saw chaos, and something felt wrong. It wasn't a single glaring error, but a series of small dissonant notes in an otherwise simple melody. A preliminary witness interview log noted the time of the interview as 8:15 p.m. But the official report from the lead detective, Frank Miller, claimed that same witness was with him, identifying a piece of evidence at the station at that exact time. It was a small thing, a clerical error perhaps. Elias flagged it and moved on. Then he found another. A lab request for testing on a fabric sample found at the scene was time-stamped the day before. The official log said the sample was collected. The neat timeline of the investigation began to fray at the edges. This wasn't just a case that was solved quickly. It was a case where the answers seemed to arrive before the questions were even asked. Curiosity, a dangerous trait for an archivist, took hold. During his lunch breaks and after hours, Elias began a quiet investigation of his own. He wasn't looking for a killer. He was looking for an explanation for the flawed record. He cross-referenced the Finch file with other documents he was scanning. Police patrol logs from that week showed Officer Miller's patrol car was signed out for personal time for several hours on a key night of the investigation. Hours that were unaccounted for in his official report. He found a supplementary report from a junior officer buried in a miscellaneous file that mentioned a second set of footprints at the crime scene. This report was never entered into the primary case file, It was never mentioned at trial. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the climate-controlled archive. This wasn't sloppiness. This was a deliberate sculpting of the truth. The speed of the case was not a sign of brilliant police work. It was a sign of a story being written, not discovered. Deep within the file, tucked inside the coroner's private notes, he found a small, sealed manila envelope. On it, a handwritten warning in faded blue ink. R. Davies, for your eyes only. Do not file. Narrator. A document can tell you what happened, but only a person can tell you why. The inconsistencies in the Finch file were threads, but Elias Thorne needed to pull one to see what would unravel. The prosecution's case had rested heavily on the testimony of a single eyewitness, a then 16-year-old girl named Sarah Jenkins. She had claimed to see Arthur Finch's car speeding away from the woods where Eleanor Vance's body was later found. Her testimony had placed him at the scene at the right time. It was the linchpin. Elias found her through public records. She was Sarah Albright now, a 71-year-old widow living a quiet life 3 states away from Havenwood. She had never returned, not even for a visit. Elias drove for 2 days, the dusty Finch file on his passenger seat like a silent accuser. He found her living in a small, tidy house at the end of a quiet street. When he knocked, the woman who answered looked tired, her eyes holding the weight of a lifetime of secrets. He introduced himself, not as an investigator, but as a county archivist seeking to clarify a historical record. At the mention of the Finch case, a mask of cold hostility fell over her face. "That was a long time ago," she said, her voice thin but firm. "I have nothing to say." She tried to close the door, but Elias held up a copy of her original statement, alongside the patrol log that proved Detective Miller couldn't have been where he said he was. "The record is wrong, Mrs. Albright," Elias said gently. "I just want to know why." He saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, a fear 50 years old. She let him in. For an hour she sat in silence as Elias laid out the discrepancies, the impossible timeline, the buried reports. He wasn't accusing her. He was showing her. He was showing her the cage of lies that had been built around her testimony. Finally, she broke. The story came out in a torrent of tears and half-whispered confessions. The guilt of half a century pouring out into the quiet living room. She told him how Detective Miller had found her, a scared teenager who had seen a car, but wasn't sure of the model or the driver. He brought her to the station, sat her down, and told her they had the man who killed Eleanor. He told her the town was terrified, that her testimony was a formality, a simple act of civic duty to put a monster behind bars and let everyone feel safe again. He showed her a picture of Arthur Finch. He described Finch's car in perfect detail. He fed her the story, piece by piece, until his words felt like her own memories. "He said I was a hero," she wept. "He said I was saving the town. I was 16. I was scared. I wanted to be a hero." The quick resolution of the case, the celebrated conviction, was all built on the coerced words of a terrified girl. Her lie had bought Havenwood a false peace, but it had cost her own. Before Elias left, she gave him one last piece of the puzzle. "There was someone else there that night," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A boy from a rich family. I told Miller I saw his car too, but he told me I must have been mistaken. He told me to never ever mention his name." She wrote the name on a slip of paper and handed it to Elias. It was a name that appeared nowhere in the official case file. Narrator. Elias Thorne now held the two things that could shatter the official story: a recanted testimony and a new name. A name that had been deliberately erased from history. The name belonged to the son of a powerful local businessman who, in 1973, had significant political influence in Havenwood. Armed with this new information, Elias filed a formal request with the State Attorney General's office, petitioning for the release of the complete, unsealed district attorney's file on the Finch case, citing evidence of a potential miscarriage of justice. The response was not what he expected. Instead of cooperation, he was met with bureaucratic stonewalling. Weeks turned into months. His requests were lost, misfiled, denied for trivial reasons. It was a clear signal that he had struck a nerve, that the 50-year-old silence was being actively, not passively, maintained. After threatening legal action, a package finally arrived. It was the complete file, including the sealed envelope addressed to D.A. Robert Davies. Elias opened it with trembling hands. Inside were a dozen pages of internal memos, notes, and what appeared to be transcripts of off-the-record interviews. But his heart sank. They were almost useless. Great thick black bars of redaction covered the pages like tombstones. Names, dates, locations, entire paragraphs were obliterated. This wasn't standard procedure to protect privacy. This was a massacre of information, a calculated, methodical cover-up. The redactions weren't hiding a simple mistake. They were hiding a conspiracy. Frustrated but not defeated, Elias took the documents to a contact he had, a forensic document specialist who worked with declassified government files. In a darkened lab, they placed the most heavily redacted page on a high-intensity light table. The powerful backlight began to reveal the ghost of what lay beneath the ink. It was a slow, painstaking process, enhancing faint indentations and analyzing ink density. And then, words began to emerge from the darkness. Pressure from mayor's office. Protect the family name. Informant payment to Finch's neighbor. And then, the most damning phrase of all. Next to the name of the boy Sarah Albright had mentioned, primary suspect, alibi provided by Date Miller. The pieces slammed into place. Arthur Finch wasn't just a suspect. He was a scapegoat. The real suspect, a boy from a powerful family, was deliberately cleared. Detective Miller hadn't just coerced a witness. He had fabricated an alibi for the likely killer and framed an innocent man to close the case. The quick solution wasn't justice. It was a transaction designed to protect the powerful and placate a frightened public. As the specialist adjusted the light, one more name began to resolve from beneath a thick black line. It was the name of the informant, the person who planted evidence in Finch's car. It was a name Elias recognized. It was the junior officer who had filed the supplementary report about the second set of footprints. The case hadn't just been solved too quickly. It had been meticulously and ruthlessly constructed. And the architects of the lie were still out there. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The official report is a masterclass in bureaucratic simplicity. File C77B, stamped closed in thick red ink. Arthur Finch, aged 58, a municipal librarian of no particular distinction, slipped on a patch of black ice, a fatal fall. A tragic, unremarkable accident. The case was opened and closed in less than 48 hours. A model of efficiency. But efficiency we've learned in the Obsidian Archive, is often the most elegant form of misdirection. Because Arthur Finch, the man who cataloged books and shushed teenagers, was living a life painted in shades the official report refused to see. It wasn't an accident. It was a carefully erased sentence in a much larger, darker story. Our investigation begins not at the scene of the accident, but in Finch's rent-controlled apartment. A place the police gave a cursory glance and sealed. A place we gained access to through a source who, like us, found the speed of the resolution suspicious. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper and something else, something metallic and anxious. The official inventory listed books, furniture, and personal effects. It failed to mention the false bottom in the mahogany wardrobe. Inside, we found not clothes, but a meticulously organized world of secrets. There were passports, each with Finch's photograph, but with different names. Julian Croft, an antiquities dealer. Robert Shaw, a freelance journalist. There were train tickets to cities Finch had no reason to visit. Geneva, East Berlin, Istanbul, all dated from the height of the Cold War. But the most damning discovery was a collection of microcassettes, their tiny spools holding whispers of his other life. On one, Finch's voice, usually a soft librarian's murmur, is tense, clipped. He speaks in what sounds like coded language, referencing the aviary and shipping schedules for Nightingale. Who was this man? The police report paints a portrait of a lonely bachelor. Our findings paint a portrait of a ghost, a professional who knew how to move through the world unseen. We found maps marked with cryptic symbols, books on advanced cryptography hollowed out to conceal shortwave radio components, and a single high-quality photograph of a woman no one in his known life could identify. The speed of the investigation was not about finding the truth. It was about preventing these questions from ever being asked. They needed Arthur Finch, the librarian, to be the only version of the story. They needed his death to be mundane. Because if they acknowledged the existence of Julian Croft or Robert Shaw, they would have to acknowledge the shadows in which he operated and the powerful entities that reside there. The case wasn't solved too quickly by mistake. It was a deliberate, surgical act of narrative control. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. They watch, they listen, and they wait for you to forget. If Arthur Finch was a ghost, he was not haunting an empty house. The other life we uncovered in his apartment was not a solitary one. His meticulous records, his coded language, his clandestine travels, they all pointed to a network, a hidden architecture of influence operating just beneath the surface of the visible world. Who were the people he met in the hushed cafes of Vienna? Who was on the other end of those shortwave radio transmissions? The official investigation, in its rush to closure, never bothered to look. But we did. Cross-referencing the travel stubs with declassified flight manifests from the era, we found a recurring pattern. Certain names appeared on the same flights as Finch's aliases, checking into the same hotels only to check out hours later. These weren't names of public figures. They were phantoms, their histories scrubbed clean, their digital and physical footprints non-existent. We found one name, however, that slipped through the cracks: Mr. Jones, a signatory on a rental agreement for a safe house in Brussels that Finch had noted in a ledger. This Mr. Jones officially died in a boating accident 2 years before the rental agreement was signed. This is the hallmark of a deep state operation, the use of cutouts and manufactured identities to create layers of deniability. These were the men in the shadows. We spoke to a retired counterintelligence officer, a man who agreed to talk only in a secure location, his face obscured. He told us that during the Cold War, unofficial black budget units were common. They answered to no official chain of command. Their mandate was simple: protect national interests by any means necessary. He said men like Finch, quiet, intelligent, seemingly invisible, were their most valuable assets. They're the ones who handle the information, our source whispered, the data that can't be trusted to a computer, the secrets that can topple governments. And when they become a liability, they are retired. Quickly, quietly. The police report on Finch's death mentions 2 witnesses who found the body. A married couple on their morning walk. But our own investigator tracked down the original beat cop who first responded. He tells a different story. He remembers 2 men in dark, identical suits, already at the scene when he arrived. They flashed credentials he'd never seen before, told him the situation was handled, and that he should secure the perimeter and wait for the detectives. These men are not mentioned anywhere in the official file. They were erased, just like Finch's real life. This wasn't a police investigation. It was a cleanup operation, managed by professionals who specialize in making inconvenient truths disappear. The case was solved too quickly because the real arbiters of justice arrived before the police did. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. The most dangerous secrets are the ones we help them keep. On the microcassettes, from Arthur Finch's hidden compartment, one word appeared more than any other: Nightingale. It was the key, the name that tied together the passports, the travel, and the men in the shadows. For months, we chased this ghost through archives and sealed records. We found nothing. It was a dead end, a phantom. Until a data leak from a defunct European intelligence service gave us our breakthrough. Buried deep within thousands of pages of raw data was a single cryptic memo from 1978. It authorized funding for a non-traditional acoustic surveillance program, codenamed Project Nightingale. It wasn't about listening through walls. It was far more insidious. Project Nightingale was a psychological warfare program designed to manipulate public opinion and discredit political targets by weaponizing information itself. They used subliminal messages embedded in public broadcasts, planted false narratives in news outlets, and pioneered the use of algorithm-driven propaganda long before the age of the Internet. They weren't just listening. They were composing the song the public would sing. And Arthur Finch, the quiet librarian, was one of their lead composers. His expertise wasn't just in books. It was in the structure of information, in how narratives are built and how they can be dismantled. He was a master cryptographer and data analyst, one of the architects of Nightingale's most sensitive operations. He helped design the very systems of control that were now being used to erase him. But something changed. His later notes, decoded from the margins of his cryptography books, show a man consumed by guilt. He writes of the songbird's cage and the unforeseen consequences of the melody. Our source in counterintelligence confirmed our fears. Finch was preparing to become a whistleblower. He had compiled a dossier, a complete history of Project Nightingale, including its illegal domestic applications and the names of its overseers. He planned to leak it. His accident occurred 48 hours before a scheduled meeting with an investigative journalist in Geneva, a meeting he arranged under the alias Robert Shaw. The men in the shadows weren't just cleaning up a compromised asset, they were protecting their magnum opus. Project Nightingale was too valuable, too powerful to be exposed. Finch's death was the final brutal act of information control performed by the very system he helped create. The case was solved quickly because the alternative was to admit that for decades, a secret, unaccountable organization had been manipulating the very fabric of reality, and one of their own was about to burn it all down. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. The truth is not buried, it is locked away. We arrive at the end, not with a neat conclusion, but with a chilling understanding. The case of Arthur Finch was not an investigation that was rushed. It was a performance, staged for the benefit of the public record. The 48-hour resolution wasn't a product of brilliant police work. It was a deadline set by the unseen hands of Project Nightingale to cauterize a wound before it could become septic. Let's reconstruct the timeline, not from the police report, but from the evidence we've gathered. Hour 0. Arthur Finch is eliminated. His death is staged to look like a common, believable accident. Within the hour, the men in the shadows, the cleanup crew, are on site. They secure the scene, remove Finch's dossier on Project Nightingale, and plant subtle, misleading clues. They are the ones who make the anonymous call to the police. By the time the first uniformed officer arrives, the scene is already a work of fiction. The two witnesses who found the body. We discovered they were moved into a new government-subsidized home a month later, their debts mysteriously cleared. They were assets, part of the stagecraft. The lead detective assigned to the case, a man with a stellar record, had a son facing serious federal charges. Those charges were quietly dropped a week after he signed off on Finch's case file. This is how the system protects itself, not with overt threats, but with leverage, with the quiet application of pressure. Every step was managed. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy noted anomalies inconsistent with a simple fall in his preliminary notes, which we obtained through a Freedom of Information request. Yet his final official report makes no mention of them. A calculated silence. The media, fed a simple and tragic story from an official police source, reported it without question. A librarian, a patch of ice, a tragedy. The narrative was clean, simple, and most importantly, it was boring. It invited no further questions. The silence that followed was not an absence of noise. It was a carefully constructed, soundproof wall. Finch's story serves as a terrifying blueprint for how the truth can be officially and efficiently murdered. His life's work was to control information, and in the end, that same machinery of control was turned against him, reducing his complex, secret-filled existence into a single, dismissible file stamped closed. The case was solved too quickly because it was never a case to begin with. It was a memorandum, a final cold-blooded entry in the ledger of Project Nightingale. And the most haunting question remains: how many other files just like his are sitting in archives, their silence calculated, their stories waiting in the dark. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors are closed so quickly for a reason. Justice, we are told, is a slow, grinding process. It is methodical, deliberate, and impartial. But in the case of the Alder Creek disappearance, justice was a lightning strike, a flash of certainty that illuminated one man and cast everyone else back into the shadows. That man was Silas Blackwood, a name that, within 72 hours of Dr. Elias Thorne's vanishing, became synonymous with guilt. Blackwood was the town recluse, the convenient specter living on the fringes of society, making him the perfect vessel for a community's fear and a department's need for a quick resolution. The evidence presented was a masterclass in narrative construction. Blackwood's hunting knife, they said, had microscopic traces consistent with the fibers of Thorne's jacket. A neighbor claimed to have heard a vehicle matching Blackwood's aging truck near Thorne's remote cabin on the night he disappeared. And then, the linchpin, Blackwood's refusal to speak. His silence was not interpreted as the fear of a man caught in a bureaucratic nightmare, but as the cold, arrogant defiance of a killer. The trial was a formality, a procedural ghost haunting the halls of the county courthouse. It lasted less than a week. The prosecution painted a picture of a resentful hermit, envious of Thorne's success, who snapped in a moment of violent rage. The defense was perfunctory, underfunded, and seemingly overwhelmed. They offered no alternative theories, called no surprising witnesses. They simply went through the motions, as if they too were convinced of the inevitable outcome. Why fight a tidal wave? Silas Blackwood was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to a maximum security facility 3 states away, effectively erasing him from the world that had so quickly condemned him. He never spoke a word in his own defense, not during the arrest, the trial, or his incarceration. He simply existed, a silent monument to a case solved too quickly. For 2 decades, he withered away in a concrete cell. Prison records, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, are sparse. They describe an inmate who was a ghost, who never caused trouble, never made friends, and never received a single visitor. He read books on astronomy and botany, a strange echo of the brilliant man he was accused of making disappear. In his final years, his health failed. He died of a heart attack on a cold Tuesday morning, alone in his cell, the same way he had lived. The official narrative was sealed. The monster of Alder Creek was dead. Case closed again. But for those who looked closer, his death wasn't an ending. It was a loose thread, a final silent protest. Because in a case built on speed rather than substance, the fate of the accused is not about justice. It's about sacrifice. Silas Blackwood was the price paid for peace of mind, the offering laid upon the altar of a swift conclusion. A closed case is a powerful thing. It's a story with a beginning, a middle, and a definitive end. It offers comfort, a sense of order restored. But the Alder Creek case was a story with missing pages, torn out in the rush to reach the final chapter. And in those missing pages, some believe, is the silhouette of a second man. The official timeline was surgically precise. It left no room for doubt, no space for alternative possibilities. Yet, deep within the archived evidence boxes, inconsistencies festered. The first person to raise the alarm was not a detective, but a rookie patrolman, Officer Miller, who conducted the initial sweep of Dr. Thorne's cabin. His handwritten notes, never entered into the official trial record, mentioned something peculiar. Near the back porch, half obscured by mud and leaves, were two distinct sets of footprints. One matched the worn work boots of Silas Blackwood. The other, however, was different. It was a smaller, cleaner tread, from a type of expensive dress shoe utterly out of place in the rugged wilderness surrounding the cabin. This detail vanished from all subsequent reports. It was an anomaly, and in a case that needed to be solved quickly, anomalies were liabilities. Years later, a local journalist named Evelyn Reed, chasing a ghost for a retrospective piece, stumbled upon Miller's notes. She began digging. She found a witness, a truck driver who was on the remote access road that night, who was dismissed by the original investigators. He swore he saw two vehicles leaving the area around the time of the disappearance. One was Blackwood's battered pickup. The other was a dark, late-model sedan with tinted windows, a car that belonged to no one in the small, isolated community. Who was driving that sedan? Who wore the dress shoes? This is the crux of the second man theory. It posits that Blackwood was not the lone actor, but perhaps a pawn, a witness, or even a second victim of a much more complex event. The theory suggests someone else was there that night, an individual with the resources and motive to not only make a man like Dr. Thorne disappear, but to expertly frame another for the crime. This unseen figure would have needed to know Blackwood's routine, his reclusive nature, and his vulnerability. They would have needed to plant the evidence with surgical precision, just enough to secure a conviction, but not enough to invite deeper scrutiny. Was Blackwood lured to the cabin? Or did he simply stumble upon something he was never meant to see? The sedan, the footprints, the very speed of the investigation, it all points to a carefully managed scene. The authorities didn't just find a suspect. It feels as though one was presented to them, gift-wrapped in circumstantial evidence, a perfect distraction from the man who drove away clean. If Silas Blackwood was the scapegoat and the second man was the architect, then who was the client? Every carefully constructed lie serves a purpose, and the elaborate deception that closed the Alder Creek case points to a motive far beyond a simple act of random violence. It points to an unseen observer, a powerful entity that operated from the shadows, pulling strings with chilling precision. To understand who this observer might be, we must look again at the victim, Dr. Elias Thorne. Publicly, he was a respected astrophysicist, but privately, his research had taken a controversial turn. Declassified documents, heavily redacted, hint that Thorne was on the verge of a breakthrough in long-range communication technology, a method that could bypass all existing encryption and surveillance. Such a discovery would be priceless to corporate rivals and a direct threat to national security agencies. Suddenly, Dr. Thorne wasn't just a small-town academic. He was a strategic asset, or a liability, on a global stage. The unseen observer, then, was not a person, but a system, a corporation, a clandestine government agency, a black ops contractor, an entity with the motive to acquire or bury Thorne's research and the means to execute a flawless operation. The speed of the investigation was not a sign of efficiency. It was a symptom of influence. Phone records, which should have been scrutinized, were cursorily examined. Financial trails that might have led to Thorne's secret backers were ignored. The entire investigative apparatus was subtly guided towards the path of least resistance, Silas Blackwood. This is how the unseen observer works. It doesn't use a hammer when a scalpel will do. It manipulates the existing system, exploiting its weaknesses. It knew a rural sheriff's department would be ill-equipped to handle a complex conspiracy. It knew the media would latch onto the simple, compelling story of the town hermit. It created a narrative that was not only believable but desirable. It solved a problem for everyone. The town had its monster, the police had their conviction, and the observer had what it truly wanted: Dr. Thorne's work, his mind, or his silence. The sedan seen leaving the scene wasn't just a getaway car. It was a corporate vehicle, a government transport. The man in the dress shoes wasn't a common criminal. He was an agent, a specialist in acquisitions of a different kind. He was the physical manifestation of the observer's will. They watched the investigation unfold from a distance, through secure channels and confidential reports, ensuring their preferred version of the truth was the one that became history. They were the ghost in the machine, the silent partner in a justice system that had been compromised before the first piece of crime scene tape was ever laid. A lie, once cemented into the official record, takes on a life of its own. It grows roots, becomes part of a place's history, and poisons everything it touches. The legacy of the case solved too quickly is not the capture of a killer, but the quiet, enduring hum of a fundamental injustice. For the town of Alder Creek, the resolution brought a fractured peace. The story of Silas Blackwood became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to children. The Thorne cabin was eventually torn down, but the space it occupied remains empty, a scar on the landscape that people avoid. The town moved on, but it was a recovery built on a faulty foundation, a collective agreement to not look too closely at the cracks. The lie became their truth. For the justice system, the case became a textbook example of rapid, effective police work, a point of pride for the department. The promotions that followed were built on that success. To question it now would be to unravel careers, to undermine public trust, to admit that the shield they carry can sometimes be used to hide a crime rather than solve one. The file sits in a dusty archive, stamped closed in bold red ink. That stamp is not just an administrative mark. It is a wall designed to repel further inquiry. The lie became policy. And what of Dr. Thorne's work? It vanished. His university research grants were terminated. His lab was quietly dismantled, and his academic papers were reclassified under national security protocols. Whatever he was working on was absorbed into the unseen world of black budgets and classified projects. His name, once synonymous with brilliance, now only exists as the victim in a small-town murder. The lie erased his true legacy. The ultimate legacy of this lie, however, is the erosion of certainty. If a man's life can be so easily rewritten, if a case can be so swiftly and cleanly diverted from the truth, then how many other stories in our archives are works of fiction? How many other solved cases are merely the public-facing narrative of a much darker, hidden operation? Silas Blackwood died with a secret, or perhaps with no secret at all, a silent man in the eye of a storm he never understood. The second man vanished into the anonymity that power and influence provide. The unseen observer continues its work, confident in the knowledge that the most effective cage is not made of steel bars, but of a story that everyone believes. The case was solved, but the truth remains at large.